On the first night of her marriage, Amelia did not sit on the edge of the bed and wonder whether her husband might one day love her. She did not cry into silk sheets, stare at the chandelier, or pray for kindness from a man whose reputation had frightened half the city before she ever learned the shape of his face. Instead, she sat at a polished wooden desk beside the open window of the master suite, dressed in soft ivory sleepwear, with papers spread around her, a calculator in one hand, and a neat notebook open beneath the lamp. Behind her, the room looked like a dream built by old money. Gold molding, cream walls, tall curtains, a carved bed large enough to swallow loneliness whole. Outside the window, the estate glowed beneath moonlight and silence. And near that same window stood Adrian Vale, billionaire heir, feared CEO, and the man who had married her that morning because his family demanded structure more than love. He watched his arranged wife press numbers into a calculator and write figures with unnerving calm. That was the moment he began to hate her. Not because she seemed heartless, not because she looked foolish, but because she looked completely at ease calculating what she might receive if his inheritance one day became hers. Everyone in the city thought Adrian Vale could read people within seconds. He had built an empire out of silence, timing, and control. He knew how ambition sounded. He knew how desperation moved. He knew the difference between admiration and hunger long before either one reached his hand. But Amelia Hart unsettled him because she looked like neither. She looked composed, curious, quietly practical. As though this marriage were not a dream fulfilled, but a puzzle she intended to solve. The wedding itself had been elegant and empty. White orchids, private vows, cold smiles from powerful relatives, a ballroom full of guests rich enough to turn coercion into tradition simply by dressing it well. Adrian had not wanted the marriage. Amelia had never pretended otherwise on her side. That should have made things easier. Yet somehow her honesty made everything worse. She arrived at the Vale estate with one suitcase, a box of books, and the kind of calm that did not belong to women entering one of the wealthiest families in the country. She was not dazzled by the marble staircase. She was not softened by the servants. She did not wander through the mansion with wide eyes and grateful silence. She observed everything once, and then carried on as though she had expected all of it. That unsettled Adrian more than greed ever could, because greedy people were simple. They reached, they performed, they wanted to be seen wanting. Amelia did not perform. She only calculated. And on the very first night of their marriage, as the city lights shimmered below and the air moved softly through the open window, Adrian found himself asking a question he never thought he would ask about his own wife. What kind of woman marries a billionaire she does not love, lives in his mansion without awe, and spends her wedding night calculating inheritance law instead of trying to win his attention? By morning, the house had already started making theories. The new Mrs. Vale was either shameless, fearless, or far more dangerous than she looked. And Adrian, who trusted no one who entered his life too calmly, decided he would watch her closely. What he did not know yet was that Amelia had entered the Vale family with a purpose far older than the wedding itself. And the numbers on her desk were not about fantasy. They were about proof. Over the next few weeks, Amelia became the quiet mystery of the estate. She was polite to everyone. She learned the staff's names quickly. She thanked the maids, asked after the gardener's injured leg, and remembered which driver had a daughter preparing for university exams. In a house where kindness was often used as theater, her kindness felt different. It was careful, practical, unannounced. But while the staff warmed to her, Adrian only grew more suspicious, because Amelia never asked about the things a new wife would normally ask. She never asked what food he preferred, never asked how to impress his grandmother, never asked which charities mattered to the family name. Instead, she asked stranger questions. Who handled the old Vale trusts when the East Vineyard had been transferred to private holding? Why the family chapel stayed locked except on Memorial Days? Why inheritance terms had been revised 2 decades earlier? Questions that sounded less like curiosity and more like excavation. Adrian first realized something was wrong when he found her in the family library on a rainy afternoon, standing beside a shelf of legal archives with one old ledger open in her hands. The room smelled of cedar, leather, and dust. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Emilia lifted her eyes when he entered, but she did not jump, apologize, or look guilty. And she simply closed the ledger and regarded him with the same steady calm that had irritated him since the wedding. That composure did something strange to him. It was not fearlessness exactly. It was independence, as though she had already accepted the possibility of his disapproval and considered it manageable. That night, Adrian began reviewing what little he knew of her background. Emilia Hart, daughter of Marion Hart, raised quietly after family hardship, educated well, but never socially ambitious. No public scandals, no powerful relatives, no previous engagement, no visible path into a world like his, until his grandmother's advisors brought her name forward as an ideal bride. On paper, she looked harmless. That was precisely what bothered him now, because harmless women did not spend evenings mapping estate holdings. And harmless women did not study trust amendments by lamplight, and harmless women certainly did not sit beneath the soft golden light of a billionaire bedroom, smiling faintly while calculating death-adjacent numbers with the patience of an auditor. Then came the letter. It arrived one gray morning with an old legal seal Adrian had not seen in years. The envelope was addressed not to Emilia Hart, but to Emilia Vale, as though whoever sent it had already known she would enter the family. Adrian noticed her expression change the moment she saw the seal. Not panic, not relief, recognition. She took the letter, thanked the butler, and left the breakfast room without explanation. That same night, for the first time since the marriage, she locked the bedroom door. It was a small sound, a simple turn of metal inside old wood. But in the Vale estate, where privacy had always been controlled from above, a locked door felt like a declaration. The next morning, Emilia appeared calm again. She drank tea, read the business page, asked the housekeeper whether the gardener's son had received his scholarship application. Only once did Adrian see a crack. Her hand paused over the teacup for half a second. That was enough. Whatever the letter contained, it mattered. And if it mattered to Emilia, then it probably connected to the same inheritance structures she had been studying since the day she arrived. Adrian had entered the arranged marriage expecting indifference. Now he found himself living beside a mystery, a woman who looked greedy from a distance, but whose every move suggested something more deliberate than simple ambition. The complication had begun. And beneath the polished surface of the Vale family, something old was starting to wake. Adrian started digging in secret. He went into the West Archive room himself late at night, without assistance, without lawyers, without family approval. The room had once belonged to his grandfather's private records clerk and still smelled of old paper and hidden intentions. There he began tracing estate revisions, trust amendments, sealed charitable accounts, and historical property transfers. At first he found almost nothing. Then he found something worse, missing references, removed indexes, files that should have existed but did not. Someone had been editing the family's memory for years. One name kept appearing in strange places before vanishing again. Marion Hart, Emilia's mother. Adrian had been told Marion was a distant, respectable nobody, a woman whose name carried no meaningful connection to the Vale family beyond old social overlap. But in the ledgers, Marion Hart appeared near foundation accounts, property reviews, restoration funds, and one sealed legal amendment tied directly to the inheritance protections now governing Adrian's marriage. That was no coincidence. The more Adrian searched, the more a darker picture emerged. Marion Hart had once worked within one of the veiled charitable research arms, not as decoration, not as clerical background, as someone trusted closely enough to review numbers. Then suddenly her name disappeared from every operational record. Around the same time, Adrian's grandfather revised the inheritance structure to reduce leverage from non-bloodline spouses and outside claimants. The timing chilled him. Meanwhile, Amelia kept moving through the house with almost unbearable calm. She asked older staff quiet questions. She spent afternoons in the chapel corridor. She requested access to donation ledgers through proper channels, leaving a paper trail too clean for anyone to call sneaky. She was not behaving like a woman trying to steal from the family. She was behaving like a woman trying to force the family to reveal itself. The shift in Adrian's mind came slowly, but once it began, it could not be reversed. What if Amelia had not married him for money? What if she had married into the Vale family because marriage was the only door left open to the truth? The answer came one evening in the private chapel. Adrian found her there alone, holding a small brass memorial plaque she had removed from the back wall. When he stepped closer, but he saw the engraved name, Marion Hart. Not listed as staff, not listed as donor, listed under a memorial trust category quietly attached to the Vale Restoration Fund. His breath caught. If the family had once formally acknowledged Marion in any memorial structure, then the later story that she was irrelevant had been manufactured. Someone had rewritten her place in their history. Amelia turned the plaque over in her hands, with a look far heavier than anger. It was the face of a daughter standing inside proof. And suddenly Adrian saw the cruel shape of his mistake. The calculator at the desk, the inheritance charts, the legal notes. He had looked at all of it and assumed greed because greed was easier to understand than justice. But maybe Amelia had never been calculating his death. Maybe she had been calculating the architecture of concealment. Maybe every number on her pages led back to one simple truth. Her mother had found something inside the Vale Empire, and the Empire had buried her for it. That realization did not make Adrian feel defensive. It made him feel ashamed. Because he had spent weeks watching Amelia from the distance of privilege, believing himself the one under threat, never once asking what kind of pain teaches a woman to dress herself in calm and walk straight into the family that ruined her life. The house exploded quietly, not with screaming, with gossip, legal calls, and carefully phrased concern. A small business column mentioned Adrian's new wife and hinted that she had shown unusual interest in trust structures and inheritance rights. The line was casual enough to seem harmless. But in wealthy circles, casual humiliation is often more effective than open attack. By noon, investors were asking questions. Board members were calling Adrian. His brother Lucas was smirking too much. And Adrian's grandmother, Eleanor Vale, requested a private family discussion. That evening, Amelia was summoned to the West Salon. Adrian arrived to find the room arranged like a court pretending to be civilized. Eleanor sat near the fire. Lucas leaned back with polished arrogance. The family attorney stood near a side table with documents already prepared. Amelia stood alone in the center of the room, calm as ever, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair. Eleanor spoke with measured elegance. She described the newspaper item as unfortunate. She described Amelia's recent curiosity as excessive. She suggested that if the marriage had become uncomfortable, the family would be willing to preserve everyone's dignity through private arrangements. A payout disguised as compassion. A quiet exit wrapped in velvet. Adrian watched Amelia carefully, expecting hurt or fury. Instead, he saw something much more revealing. Relief. Very slight, but unmistakable. As though this was the moment she had been waiting for. because now the family was no longer pretending nothing was hidden. Now they were negotiating, and people negotiate only when they are afraid. That same night, Adrian returned to the archive room and dug until dawn. This time he found an old recording stored inside a mislabeled foundation box. It contained a private meeting from years earlier. The sound quality was poor, but one thing became clear almost immediately: that Marion Hart had discovered diverted restoration funds, masked beneficiaries, and property transfers hidden through shell entities. She had refused to approve the false numbers. And after that refusal, the Vale family had not confronted her openly. They had cornered her more elegantly. They discredited her concerns, restructured access, buried files, adjusted inheritance law to protect themselves from future outsiders. Even the memorial category attached to her name looked less like honor and more like a controlled settlement disguised as charity. Adrian stopped the recording before it finished, because he no longer needed the rest to understand the truth. Amelia had not come for fortune, she had come for evidence, and the inheritance she seemed obsessed with was the same instrument the family had once used to erase her mother. By morning, the shape of Adrian's own life looked different. His fortune was no longer clean, his family name no longer noble, his arranged marriage no longer simple. And the woman he had hated for caring too much about inheritance had become the only person in the house brave enough to expose what inheritance had cost. For the first time in years, Adrian walked into a board meeting with no interest in preserving comfort. The directors urged containment. The attorney suggested settlement. His grandmother asked him to remember which side he was on. That sentence changed everything. Which side? Not what was true, not what was right, only which side. Adrian understood then that his family had never wanted a moral heir. They wanted a loyal wall, but walls crack, and once they do, light enters whether the house wants it or not. He refused the settlement, and he ordered an independent review. He restored Marion Hart's records to internal review status, and he walked out of the room before anyone could stop him. For the first time in his life, Adrian Vale chose truth over the structure that made him powerful. When Adrian found Amelia in the lower archive office later that day, she looked up with caution, not trust. He could not blame her. He had been another locked door for too long. He told her the review had started. He told her he had heard Marion's recorded voice. He told her the family's concealment was real. Amelia said very little, but the silence around her changed. Not softened exactly, opened, a fraction. Enough for him to understand how exhausting it must be to carry proof alone for years and then hear the truth finally spoken aloud by someone who once doubted you. After that, the estate divided. Some board members treated Adrian like a liability. Lucas tried to move funds and flee scrutiny. Eleanor withdrew into cold strategy. But the staff, who had watched Amelia help them quietly from the start, began protecting her in small ways. Old papers surfaced. Forgotten names were offered. A retired accountant requested a meeting. A former clerk revealed where secondary ledgers had been hidden. Once the first secret cracked, others followed. Community grants had been reduced privately after public announcements. Properties had been absorbed from vulnerable owners under legal pressure. Memorial funds had doubled as settlement channels. The family's reputation for generosity had been built, in part, on elegant forms of theft. Amelia documented everything with relentless care, not for revenge alone, for restoration. That difference became impossible for Adrian to ignore. She was not interested in spectacle. She wanted Marion Hart's work recognized properly. She wanted stolen value traced accurately. She wanted institutional repair, not just emotional victory. And somewhere inside that precision, Adrian's hatred fully dissolved. In its place came admiration, then remorse, and then something deeper he did not yet dare name. The public filing landed 3 days later. At first it looked technical. Historic trust irregularities, concealed beneficiary exclusion, misallocated restoration funds. Then the press saw the names and dates, and the city erupted. Commentators circled, investors panicked, old allies disappeared. Lucas was tied to secondary diversions. 2 trustees resigned. The family foundation was placed under independent oversight. Eleanor lost the power she had protected for decades. Adrian stood before cameras and refused the usual corporate performance. He acknowledged wrongdoing tied to family-controlled structures. He named Marion Hart. He promised no sealed suppression, no quiet settlement, and no reputational laundering. That single act changed the story of him almost as much as the documents changed the story of the family. But the most important moment came later, in private, exactly where everything had begun. The master suite was quiet. The window stood open to the night air. Papers covered the desk again. Only this time, the calculations were different. Restitution models, scholarship recovery plans, archive restoration notes. At the top of one page, Adrian saw a title written in Amelia's neat hand, The Hart Review Initiative. And he stood beside her and finally understood the true joke of his own fear. He had thought Amelia cared only about his inheritance. What she actually cared about was the hidden human cost beneath it. The fortune was never the prize. The truth was, weeks passed. The city moved on to newer scandals, but the deeper work continued. Marion Hart's name was restored publicly under her rightful professional role. A memorial plaque was moved from the back of the chapel to the front, no longer hidden, no longer softened into vague gratitude. Satellite properties were sold to fund restitution. Private archives were opened for academic review. The Vale estate itself began to feel less like a fortress and more like a place learning awkwardly to breathe. What remained between Adrian and Amelia was more delicate than any legal reform, and they had begun in a trap designed by others. Whatever came next had to be chosen freely. And one night, after the filings, after the scandals, after the first true quiet the house had known in years, Amelia sat once more at the desk by the open window and wrote a final line beneath the latest ledger. Debt acknowledged. Work continues. Then she closed the notebook. For a moment, neither of them moved. The room held everything it had ever held between them: suspicion, coldness, observation, evidence, shame, respect. And finally, something gentler than victory. Amelia looked at Adrian, not as enemy, not as obligation, but as a man who had changed when truth became expensive. Slowly, without performance, she placed her hand over his. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than their wedding vows ever had. And because this time there was no board, no strategy, and no inheritance clause guiding it. Only choice. And Adrian, the CEO who once hated his arranged wife because he believed she cared only about his wealth, finally understood the moral buried beneath his own mansion walls. Sometimes the person who seems obsessed with money is really tracing the outline of an old wound. Sometimes the coldest marriage hides the deepest investigation. And sometimes the one you fear is after your inheritance is the only one brave enough to uncover what that inheritance cost. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Emotional Stories right now for more powerful billionaire dramas, emotional twists, secret family scandals, and unforgettable endings. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.